Evening and good afternoon. It's Shirley with Spirit of Matter. And well, the day and the hour are not so accurate because this is night. And so I don't know which is the night ruler, and I definitely don't have the application that could give me the hour. But the ascendant is in 28 degrees Capricorn, applying to conjunct Pluto, a retrograde Pluto. It's interesting because the ascendant for this episode, and you have here the title, is basically looking at the chart of Pat Robertson. And the ascendant is in the degree where it's Pluto for the United States, or Pluto return for the United States. So, just interesting. Moon in the second house in Aquarius for this. And yeah, ruler of the ascendant is Saturn house in Pisces. That is still sextile in Jupiter and Taurus. Um, Midheaven in 15 Scorpio and Mars in the 8th house. So the ruler of the midheaven in the 8th house, ruler of the descendant in the second, and ruler of the first in the third. Now, without further ado, I will go to Pat Robertson's chart. We don't have ascendant. He was born on 22 March 1930s, and he died pretty recently, I think, in the like today or a couple of hours ago. So I don't have the time of his death, and nor do we have the time of the birth. So we will wait for more people. But the thing is that I have no idea who this person is. And so what I usually do is predict what will be in the chart, and now I'm going to do it in a reversed way. I'm going to look at the chart and try to figure who this Pat Rabbi. I know that he was a right-wing priest, but that's it. Okay, I don't know um, anything else. So he had Moon and Saturn in Pisces. This means that he is going through both his Saturn return and the Sadasati. And that happens at around 28 years for him. So he was born in the 1930s. If you get 30s, then you get the 60s, then you get the 90s, then you get 2020s, which is right now. So he's having his third Saturn return, and that one he did not survive. So just having a Saturn return with a Sadasati, it already tells me that this, oh, but it's not Sadasati. Naya, it's not Sadasati because he already went through his third Saturn return with the Sadasati when Saturn was in Capricorn. So this tells me this is a very resilient person. It's not only that he survived 3 Saturn returns and still lived, but also that those Saturn returns coincided with Saturn going over the moon, which is a point where a person's resilience is being tested. Of course, the moon is in Saturn's sign, which is fallen, but it's also can develop quite the resilience because it's acquainted emotionally with the energy of Saturn. And so, whoever he was a very resilient person. I'm seeing this moon in conjunct Jupiter, yeah, Jupiter in Gemini, and Lilith in Aquarius. He had Mars next to Fumalaut in Pisces, with the Mercury on the last phase of Pisces. And again, we don't have an ascendant here. Mars Fumalaut can be a place like with Mars Fumalaut, you can both have tremendous wisdom with words and actions, or act in a way that is um, it can undermine another living soul because you have this Fumalaut wisdom. And Fumalaut is about the wisdom that cannot be spoken, and because you just don't have the words to describe it, or if it comes with the ability to communicate, it is a very physical communication. And with Mars, there's something mystical about the drive of the person. Because Mars is sharp words and the nature of formalization is of that deep wisdom, it can also mean that the person is both slandering and being slandered. So a person can also be slandered with this one. So, granted that he was not an astrological magician who could tackle that or mitigate that, that would mean that both he could both perform slander and be slandered, with mainly with sharp words here. Although Mars can denote action, um, that kind of tells of this person. Perhaps it was the issue of slandering. Perhaps he also was a performer of those slanderings. And this Mars is separating from an opposition to retrograde Neptune in Virgo. So, violation of boundaries, non duality, there is just something there where the drive of a person, the actions of a person, and the goals of a person can be disillusioned. They can have ideation and devaluation around their drive. Okay, they can act for a certain goal, set a certain goal, and be very idealized, but also they can find that this goal is disappointing. It's like an eternal, it can be an eternity that you can't really reach in this physical world. Um, Pluto here in Cancer, so he was of the Pluto in Cancer generation. Again, he was born in the 1930s. Okay, he's almost 100 years old. Um, so of that era, okay, of the Pluto Cancers, and the Pluto Cancers were people that were aware of the power of nationality, the power of nations, the power of the family, um, the um, and the power of the people, not from an Aquarian point of view, but because the moon represents the people in nations. So that was a certain awareness that was also there. The power of nourishment, having the right nourishment, industrialized food, GMOs, and whatnot, it can also be the beginning of that. And this Pluto is opposing Saturn and the moon. So the ruler of Pluto is opposing Pluto. Um, this means that this person can have certain conflicts that are internal but are projected outwards, or that he can internalize conflict as well, or internalize certain transformation. And there's this triad between this moon ruled by Saturn, ruling Pluto, with Pluto opposing Saturn and the moon. Um, it would need a closer inspection. I don't know what to say about that. Emotional structures being reformed, and the structure of care being reformed. With Moon in Capricorn, one of the reasons that it can be falling is because it puts the emotional resilience before the safety and nourishment. So emotional resilience comes before safety and nourishment, and it can be a shade of the patriarchy, because Saturn represents patriarchy. Saturn Capricorn represents patriarchy, and the value of the patriarch is resilience. You need to grow resilience. You need to man up. You need to survive in the mountains. But that need is not. It can, you go on a pilgrimage following maturation. Saturn is also the planet of maturation. When we have the moon there, it is fallen because before you mature, you need to be in the hands of your caregiver. You need to be pampered, you need to be catered to, you need to have your needs met, and and it's not really safe going on a pilgrimage just yet. And so the moon in the sign of patriarchy is basically not so safe. It is asked to form resilience way before its times. And Pluto here opposing this could actually be a bit of a blessing, because it means that the resilience of the person is being um, challenged to remind them that they are human, that eventually they do need care, and that that care is not necessarily only patriarchy, it's not necessarily only resilience. It's also having your emotional needs met. That being said, there is an intricacy when your emotional needs um, are Saturn. So you have the emotional need to become a mature person before you actually are maturing. So that is perhaps a theme that we will see playing out in his life. Um, and then we have this in conjunction to Jupiter that is ruling, Saturn Pisces, but in terms of planets, Jupiter is ruling Mars, Mercury. Yes, Mars and Mercury, and is in Mercury's sign. So there's this reception between Mercury being in Jupiter's sign and Jupiter being in Mercury's sign, um, that's playing out. And that can create themes of confusion plus trial and error when it comes to implementing your beliefs, because or communicating your beliefs. So that can be both that the person has certain beliefs and he develops a philosophy over things that are mercurial. So philosophy of children, philosophy of trade, philosophy on some degree of genderless people, because Mercury can be genderless. Um, uh, you know, and philosophy of language. So, really, what does religion say about language? Okay, this is something that Jupiter with in a Mercury sign would be concerned of. What does religion say about children? Okay, so those things are important to him. This Jupiter is squaring his Mars and is in reception with Mercury, and Mercury is both our communication, our trade, so business with, and our skill, um, both a sense of play, and he basically his little inner child here is fascinated about um, the great vast. And so it can be religion, it can be philosophy, but it can also be oceans, it can also be the void itself. Okay, so practicing being with the void. Like this person could be a person that has a meditation of the inner child just as much as they could be a right wing priest, which is what eventually they were. Oh, he was. Interesting day. So, Mars is ruling Aries and Scorpio, so he is ruling the nodes, and here we see that um, this is a person who had Rahu in Taurus and Ketu in Scorpio. So he was having a nodal return not long ago, and before he died. Venus, the ruler of Rahu and Chiron, is with Uranus. So Venus conjuncting Uranus in Aries. This tells us the person was a part of the sense of self, Aries, of the person was related with controversial controversial relations, revolutionary women, a voice that is unusual, eurekas, certain sudden insights, flashes of insight about women, the way and those women are of martial nature. So maybe he had something to say about feminism that was unusual. Um, but they needed to be a rebel, and that had involved the feminine. I don't know. They could also be quite attractive of the kind of person that the people who were attracted to him were suddenly attracted to him, or he was suddenly attracted to women, and that was unexpected. He could have had unusual affairs. Doesn't mean that he had. It's just, yeah, again, I don't know nothing about him. Yeah, this is a reverse version. I look at the chart, and I try to understand who am I dealing with, and then I'm going to read about him. And so the sun here is also in Aries. This Venus-Uranus conjunction is sextile in Jupiter. So there was great, perhaps, benefit. I would say benefit is more than fortune because, again, I don't know. And is squaring the moon and Saturn. So he had a natural Saturn Uranus square, and Moon and Venus square. Moon and Venus at odds basically mean that your sense of safety and your sensuality are in conflict. It means that you cannot feel safe in your sensuality, and it means that what makes you feel safe does not necessarily turn you on. Um, and that can be a bit of an issue. So there's this desire for safety, which he would lean on tradition to get and seclusion, but then there is this desire for innovation, of streak of rebellion, that would be denoted by his sensuality. So um, that person can act in ways that are not contributing to his emotional safety. And depending on what moon represented in his chart, the emotional safety of the lunar figures in his life. So we don't have the houses, it can be caregiver, it can be men and women at the same time. So yeah. Um, and sun and moon are in square relations. And that also tells us that there is an internal conflict between the way he feels things to be and his sight. Okay, so it's like one eye sees one way, the other eye sees the other way. And it's usually represented by the caregivers of the person, so the mother and the father. Um, but the rulers of the sun and moon, which is the Saturn and Mars, they sextile. And so this tension is somehow mitigated by uh, the rulers of the sun and moon. So there's a tension and harmony at the same time. Um, the sun in conjunct, okay, she sextiles Lilith, but in conjunct Neptune, and that can mean that that which is beyond what is seen clearly in naked eye um, poses a point of paradox, unresolvable, or seemingly unresolvable paradox between the way he cognitively sees the world, or the world, his sense of being, his sense of confidence, sense of self, very strong here, and the invisible realm, okay, which is Mercury ruled here. Um, in what way does it play out for him? I have no idea. He was religious, so I don't know. Um, like this could be basically the chart of a person who's very scientifically oriented. So maybe he was having this dissonance between honoring that which you cannot know in cognitive ways and the science. Maybe he was trying to, or maybe there was a certain dissonance in his preaches where maybe he would rely on certain things that he considered traditional and natural. Saturn also rules agriculture, so maybe it was like seeing people as species, like the kind of like that kind of Nazi, and and then but he was a Christian priest, so like aren't all people divine beings? Maybe he didn't see it that way. Maybe it was this weird improbability of the merging of twos that don't merge, like racial um, outdated racial ideas about humanity and nature, and um, and religious teachings. So perhaps that. Um, the way I ran into his death notice was of somebody that says that you don't usually speak about evil leaving the world, but in this case I'm tempted to. And they said, okay, they shared the post where it said that the Pat Robertson is dead. So I have no idea who he is, but obviously he seemed, upon his death, the way he was seen was evil. So by certain segments of society. Um, So, why would people see him as evil? That could be the Sun in conjunct Neptune in terms of what the Sun is doing. And the Sun is ruled by Mars, while the Moon is ruled by Saturn. The Sun is squaring this Moon. So, what he felt confident about was at odds with the sense of being emotionally safe, and that could mean he felt confident in struggle, or he maybe tried to naturalize a certain struggle because Mars and Saturn sextile. So perhaps the teachings and the reasons he was doing things, or was delving into the occult in a secretive way, to act in some ways that were racist, that saw people as species, and that did not go well with this Neptune that actually requires for non-dual, um, a more compassionate or even sacrificial view. Um, Children, sacrificial of children. Again, I don't know. Okay, I don't want to say things that I don't know. Mercury is trining this Pluto. Um, Leaving us to guess what was going on. Okay, just Mercury trines Pluto gives us a person who can communicate, although Mercury is fallen in Pisces. Through art or through a certain type of eloquence, he can express that which is in between words and have a permeable consciousness that when he communicates is also permeating consciousnesses. So he could penetrate the soul and psyche of people because he was himself permeable. So let's see who this person was. Do I have transits to this chart? So it's natal chart. I want to see current transits. Okay. So this is the chart with the transits. So the mid-heavy zone is Pluto. Um, oh, the current ascendant. I'm sorry. The heck is going on? What is going on with this transits plus birth, but we don't have his ascendant? Also, they naturally put his ascendant here in 12 degrees Cancer, but it's not something that is known to us. What is going on? Maybe they had to put some random hours, so we're gonna ignore the inner circles, ascendant stuff. We have it right now is in Cancer. With Venus in Leo, Mars, Lilith, Sun with a lot of fortune in Gemini. I'm trying to see where's the pointy thingy. Oh, Jupiter is where his Ra was. So right now we have Jupiter separating from where his Ra was, Vertex separating from his Chiron, Chiron on his Venus. Um, yeah, Like I don't see a lot more than that. Okay, going back to the chart. Now let's see who this Robertson, Peter Robertson was. Not this one. Oh no, this is for another story. Um, not Pete, Pete Robertson. Pete, thank you, Pete Robertson. Wait, I'll do it in Hebrew and then I'll switch on. Oh, there it is. Pat Robertson. I want to say Peter. Yeah. It's called, and his name is Marion Gordon, and so the name is Pat. Why? Okay. He died in June 8th, today, 2023. American media mogul, religious broadcaster, political commentator, president. Oh, he wanted to run for presidency in 1988, and Southern Baptist minister. Advocated conservative Christian ideology, known for his involvement in the Republican Party, associated with charismatic movement within Protestant evangelism. So I don't know what is charismatic in that relation. It's not like charisma, I believe. Or maybe yes. The Regent University of the Christian Broadcasting Network, CBN. Okay, this is education. Plenty of Ivy League. What does it tell about Ivy League? I don't know. Um, he was active between 1969 and 2023, so still active at the time of his death. Republican, the 700 Club, 1966 to 2021. Wow, I have no idea what is this. Um, Four children, including Gordon. Dede Elmer is the spouse, which died last year. Avshalom Willis is the parent, and yeah, he has a website. Had a website. Let's try to see if we can go directly here. That will probably tell us more of who he was. So biography. Um, okay, he was bestseller, Fabric of American History. When he was 2 years old, his father was elected for United States House of Representatives, where he served for 14 years. So he's the second generation, I believe, of parliament people in the House. So, okay, and oversee and guide all bills regarding taxation. So that was his father's work, tending to taxation. In 1946, um, his father served in the Senate and seat of the agent Carter Glass. So for 20 years, this is just the father. So you see, very conservative. You know, Saturn in Capricorn, just the Saturn of Saturns, right? It's a patriarch. And I say that not in a demoting way. Okay, he was doing the things of patriarchy. Controlled much of the business of the United States Senate. Senate. Sednas. Sedna is about a theme of mundane betrayal, so it's interesting that I said that. U.S. Sednas. Um, Pat said of his father, he lived humbly and frugally. He never and that his private and public life must be above reproach. Okay, that was on his website. His grandfathers were clergymen, so generations of religious patriarchal like leaders of society. Um, James Robertson, his ancestor, to Virginia in 1695, was an Anglican clergyman. Spent his Virginian Churchill and Gordon ancestors were also clergymen. Okay, so there's a lot about his ancestry, which we would expect here. So there's his education, which we can expect this Ivy League generation of education, like everybody going to the universities that their parents and grandparents went to, and then donating money, and then kind of doing that traditional path on its pros and cons. He married a young, lovely woman from Columbus, Ohio, named Dede Elmer. So this is his marriage, and she had been fashion model and beauty queen. So that is interesting. This is something that um, I guess it's interesting because she was, kind of this religious Christian man marrying a fashion model and a beauty queen. So interesting. Okay, there's something unusual about the relationship, right? He's a clergyman or he's a priest, and he's marrying this woman who's basically known for her appearance, which the religion that he is coming from is considered um, like the value of appearance uh, and of making money from uh, uh, hers is making money from your body, but not necessarily like trafficking or something like that, God forbid, but um, making money from being a beautiful woman. And that does not seem to coincide with what we would think right wing, like religious thingy is. Um, so they were married for 67 years before she predeceased him on April 19, 2022, at the age of 94. So she was a source of wisdom and encouragement in all of the various ministry activities, decisions that were to come. Okay, Virginia. So there's 24 great children. So a very big family. Very big family. So quite some children. And 14 grandchildren, 24 grandchildren. So he lived to see his grandchildren, which is interesting and also beautiful. Pat earned his JD. First, I call it DJ. What is JD from Yale? What is JD? Junior. What is JD? In 1955, and his MD MDIV. I like. I know Bachelor of Science, Master, PhD, Professora. I don't know all these initials, so pardon me. From New York Theological Seminary in 1959. After Pat accepted Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior, the Lord spoke to Pat and told him to build a Christian television network for his glory. Okay, so he was channeling with the divine, and he said the Lord. I guess they mean the divine directly, or they mean Jesus. I'm not sure. 1959, Pat moved his family to Tidewater, Virginia, with just $70 and a vision of establishing the first Christian television network in the United States. So he was pioneering in something that was traditional. Okay, so bringing tradition to television. So the technology, the kind of Saturn Uranus square, pronounced itself as a person whose innovation had to do with the religious broadcast. So interesting, interesting. He didn't even own a TV set. He filed incorporation papers for the Christian Broadcasting Network, raising funds to a defunct UHF station. 1961, CBN began broadcasting. Um, so his son became the CEO eventually. Yeah. And the ministry's scope grew exponentially over the decades, reaching viewers across America. So his flagship program In 1963, packed the club of 700 viewers to give $10 a month. So this was the 700 Club, and that helped him. Now I want to talk about what was the criticism of him. So I'm going to go back to, um, obviously I'm not going to see it at his site. So early life, Christian network, what is Operation Blessing? Medical teams developing countries to help people who had no access to medical care. Well, the usual charity stuff. Um, okay, so charity work, other ventures, so broadcasting, of course, American Center for Law and Justice, International Family Entertainment, INC, and yeah, you like I can understand why people are being like, okay, political service and and activism. So he was a president of the Council for National Policy, and in 1982 he served on Victims of Crime and Task Force for President Reagan. Victims of Crime Task Force for President Reagan. I don't know what this means. In Virginia, he served on the board of Virginia Economic Development Partnership and on the Governor's Council of. After his unsuccessful presidential campaign, Robertson started the Christian Coalition, 1.7 million member Christian right organization campaigned mostly for conservative candidates. So, what was he doing? The coalition was sued by the Federal Election Commission for coordinating its activities with the Republican candidates. So, basically, religious lobbying for office in 1990s and 1994, failing to report its expenditures. So lack of transparency. Here the complaint was dismissed by the federal judge. In 1986, he told Israeli Foreign Affairs that South Africa was a major contributor to Reagan administration efforts to help the anti-Sandinista forces. Why did he tell that to Israeli Foreign Affairs? Okay. Then his coalition was fined for improperly aiding the representative of Newt Greenwich. So again, lobbying for trying to affect or to have like this religious agenda within politics, which is definitely very difficult to litigate in a country whose Declaration of Independence is "In God We Trust." Same with Israel, by the way. So this connection between the divine and the state, although necessitating a certain separation of the state and the religion, makes it very difficult in cases where somebody violates this because it doesn't look like it's being violated. If the country says it's God we trust, then you can have right-wing people seeing religion in a certain way, trying to affect the politics without being able to be held accountable, because that's just not the fundamentals of what the United States was founded on. And the ascendant where I began to talk about this person's chart was on the Pluto return point of the United States. So yeah, Robertson had been a governing member of the whatever it is, Board of Governors, and then 2007 announced he's endorsing Rudy Giuliani, the NYC, yeah, governor, to be the Republican nominee. I did not even know Rudy Giuliani was Republican in 2008 presidential elections. So now he was criticizing for his endorsement of Giuliani, a pro-choice candidate who supported gay rights. Okay, so he was supporting Giuliani, who was pro-choice and supported gay rights. So he was criticized within his own community. Why do you support this person who is not representative of traditional right-wing um, issues. Now, if you think about Venus as values and Uranus as something unusual and rebellious, so he was a bit of a Gadel point in his own community. So he was criticized from within, not only from outside his community. While usually associated with the political right, Robertson endorsed the environmental causes. He appeared in a commercial, just something about greenwashing that is overwhelming. Um, with AI Sharpton joking about this, the urging of people to join the We Can Solve It campaign against global warming, which is now called climate change. Um, in January 2009, a broadcast of the 700 Club, Robertson stated that he was adamantly opposed to the division of Jerusalem between Israeli and the Palestinians. He also stated that Armageddon was not going to be fought at Megiddo, okay, but would be the Battle of Jerusalem, when the forces of all nations come together and try to take Jerusalem away from the Jews. Jews are not going to give up Jerusalem, they shouldn't, and the rest of the world is going to insist that they give it up. So he basically predicted that Jews will have to fight over Jerusalem again. Um, Robertson added that Jerusalem is a spiritual symbol that must not be given away, and yet he holds that it should be held by the Jews, where Jerusalem is a center of all three monotheistic religions. Because Jesus Christ, the Messiah, will come down to the part of Jerusalem that the Arabs want, and this would not be good. So he trusts the Jews to safeguard Jerusalem in favor of Christians, but does not trust Arab, which is interesting as a person whose ancestors are half Christian and half Jews. When I was in my fatherland, Netherlands, and motherland is Israel, I was told by the local Jewish community that it is okay for me to go to a mosque, but it's not okay for me to go to church. Which of course I had my own opinion about, but especially when the church carried the pride flag. So, of course, I was in favor of the church, but and by the way, Star of David and the a crescent moon of the Islam. So very inclusive, Mr. Kirk, and that is very interesting for me to read about a Christian person who trusts the Jews to safeguard the returning of Jesus more so than he trusts Muslims or Arabs. So I don't know why. It's just interesting. Robertson repeatedly called for the legalization of cannabis, saying it should be treated in a manner analogous to the regulation of alcoholic beverages and tobacco. So, all in all, it seems like he held more liberal views than other right-wing candidates. Stated that so he was not above supporting a pro-choice, pro-gay rights, legalizing cannabis, which is by the way helpful for people who deal with CPTSD and PTSD, like LGBTQ people that are sometimes murdered for just being or assaulted for just being, which is horror. He stated that I think it's just shocking how many of these young people wind up in prison and get turned into hard criminals because they have the possession of a very small amount of controlled substances. Absolutely true. The whole thing is crazy. In 2014, he turned against the legalization of cannabis. So yes, cannabis can in itself be quite harming. I have heard from people who I know a person who was addicted to, I think it was crystal or heroin, and she said that cannabis, in I think it was in drops, was stronger in effect than the hard drugs on them. So this was news to me, um, and so it's a big question. I know the person, the Dutch person that was fighting organized crime that is also drug cartels, basically human trafficking and child trafficking, but the drugs cartel. And that was the freeze he called to legalize drugs. So of course, he did not mean cannabis, because he said the war on drugs is a lost cause, and at least if we can save the people, if we can tend to the people, if we don't make it a prohibition, then it's more difficult to be criminal around this. So I don't know if the priest was right or not, but he definitely was a person who looked very deeply into the topic for many, many years. So this is an intricate topic. Is cannabis a recreational drug? Is cannabis something that could potentially be more harmful? I don't know. I do know that some people do need this drug to persist, which is some certain people who are coping with pain or CPTSD and so on. 1988 presidential bid. So that's where he was running for Republican. I do want to get to know the criticism, controversies. This is the interesting stuff. As a commentator, like I said, I ran into the news that he is dead by a person saying, I don't usually talk about evil going from the world, but in this case, I'm tempted to. So he was basically celebrating his death. So let's see why. As a commentator and minister, Robertson frequently generated controversy. The divisive and dehumanizing nature of his comments resulted in some of the remarks being a subject of national and international media attention, prompting responses from politicians. So that seems like the Mars Fumaloud kind of slander thingy. It's like Mars Fumaloud untamed. Um, Robertson, and take into account that Mercury is in Pisces, which is falling, that can mean that the person wanted to say one thing, but the words were coming out in all the wrong directions, and being sharp, pointed, and quite visceral. Robertson's service as a minister included the belief that in the healing power of God. He cautioned believers that some Protestant denominations may harbor the spirit of the Antichrist. So, again, fundamentalism, which unfortunately can also be, it's not just the Pluto Mercury, which was trine there, but which is trine. So Pluto itself does not necessarily mean fundamentalism with Mercury. It can also be the Saturn religion and Uranus square. So Uranus, radical religion. Um, denounced Hinduism as demonic. Okay, very tolerant boy. Now we get more of it. Huh? It's very not unusual. Okay. Robertson denounced left-wing views of feminism, activism regarding homosexuality, abortion, and liberal college professors. Okay, so he's not pro people. Critics claim Robertson had business dealings in Africa and former president of Liberia and convicted war criminals Charles Taylor. So he was being friends with benefit with organized crime. Oh, war criminals. Sorry, war criminals. It's a difference, like state of organized crime. And former Zaire President Mobutu Sese Seko. I hope I pronounced it right. Both of whom had been internationally denounced for claims of human rights violations. So he was friends with people who were not doing saint thingies to humanity. Robertson was criticized internationally for his call for Hugo Chavez's assassination. So he was calling to assassinate Hugo Chavez, the voice of peace, and for his remarks concerning Ariel Sharon's ill health as an act of God. So he had a love-hate relationship with war criminals. And in an interview, the 700 Club, Robertson stated, and this one was, if only one viewer in 100 gets it, fine. So this is my, I cannot say honoring because they were probably also accused for sexual harassment, but it's Vince Gilligan. I had last year that Israel was entering into the most dangerous period of its existence as a nation. Has been said so many times and ways ago. So this is Israel stuff. During the week of September, oh, he also had something to say about September 11, 2001. He interviewed Jerry Falwell, who expressed his opinion that the ACLU had to take a lot of blame for this. Has to take what is the ACLU? So, in addition to the pagans and the abortionists and the feminists and the gays and the usual shit, helped her attacks of September 11th make it happen. Did you know that in September the sun is Mercury ruled? So, um, like, the sun goes through this Mercury ruled sign without any harm happening, like, hardly ever. Just gay people, genderless people having a luminary for a month in their sign, and no horror happens. And no, it doesn't accumulate or anything like that. Robertson said, "I totally concur." Both evangelists were seriously criticized by President George W. Bush for their comments, for which Falwell later issued an apology. And that's Falwell, not Robertson. So he never apologized for that, and nor would that apology be authentic. So he genuinely thought that people who are being people, women, gays, queers, which is the majority of humanity, are, yeah. Less than 2 weeks after Hurricane Katrina killed 1,836 people, Robertson implied for the September 12, 2005 broadcast of the 700 Club that the storm was God's punishment in response for America's abortion policy. So, according to Peterson, America that abolished abortion should have no natural disaster, which we already know is not the case, since then. That is not the case. And for sure, I can tell you with the eclipses of 2024, 2025, 2026, it will not be the case. Um, he suggested that September 11 attacks and disaster in New Orleans could be connected in some way. Yes, they are. But perhaps we should point our fingers more to the governments. In 2009, Robertson said that Islam is a violent political system bent on the overthrow of the governments of the world and world domination. Do you know any religion that doesn't have a messianic stream in it? Um, so, yeah, which is why we need separation between religion and the state, which he did not support. He went on to elaborate that you're dealing with not a religion, you're dealing with a political system, and I think we should treat it as such and treat its adherents as much as you would members of the Communist Party, members of some fascist group. Just replace Islam with Christianity. And it's like, that's like, are you sure about this tactic? Uh, okay. Robertson's response to the 2010 Haiti earthquake also drew international condemnation. He claimed that Haiti founders had sworn to pack to the devil. Oh my god. In order to liberate themselves from the French slave owners and indirectly attribute to the earthquake to the consequences of the Haitian people being cursed for doing so. Can't Christianity go back to being about uh, loving people, being compassionate, um, a connection with the divine, regardless of if you buy something from someone, um, repenting places where you had wrongdoing, understanding that you are loved even when you're not perfect. Like that's Christianity. Not that that has nothing to do with either Jesus or God or like and I don't need to challenge God to say that. It's just like the spirit of religion. Okay. Um. So CBN later issued a statement saying that Robertson's comments were based on the widely discussed 1791 slave rebellion led by Dutty Boukman and Was Kaiman, where the slave allegedly made a famous pact with the devil in exchange for victory over the French. Not like later like the Americans, right? So, again, this is something good to remember when Pluto will be reingressing to Aquarius, the sign of the people. The French Revolution, the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, it was people who had lands that could have a voice there. Okay? And the people who did not have lands were considered Satans. So the equivalent of equating renters to uh, the, uh, the protocol of the elders of Zion. Like I literally saw a meme that was looking at renters, tenants as the protocols of the elders of Zion. It's kind of like the elders are eating at the money of the world through the welfare, and there's nothing left to the house owners. It's kind of like, can we talk about the traffickers that are house flipping rather than the tenants? His this whole house flipping thingy and forcing you to take high financial risks and miscalculated financial decisions in order to think that maybe if you take a loan on your name, not on some trust name, and buy a house with it, then you will have tenants who will pay your rent, which doesn't seem to work. Okay, because if you have to take a loan to buy another house, it already means that we're in trouble. Okay, so housing does not become a safe, solid investment, but rather a bubble. Um, and so, who do they blame for this? They blame the tenants. So, that's kind of like blaming the slaves that their crops are not growing, but you never fed the slaves. It doesn't make sense. Okay? It's like tend to feed in the slaves rather than blaming them. Or giving them land. In March 2015, Robertson compared Buddhism to a disease in the 700. Okay, I can see why. Like I can see the like I can see a point in the people who criticize him. The American Center of Law and Justice, a conservative Christian watchdog group Robertson founded to promote Christian fair in the public schools, called for multi-pronged attack on mindfulness programs because they appear to be similar to Buddhist religious practices. They are Buddhist religious practices. Uh, proponents of secular mindfulness say mindfulness is not a Buddhist practice, it is a contemplative practice used in religious traditions around the world by many different names. Fine. So he was basically denouncing something that can help the people who can do it reach the states of consciousness that allow them to channel God. If I made an episode about Matt Moniz, and he is preaching for reaching connection with God through um, meditation, which Kant would also advocate for, and so on and so forth. So it's meditation on the logos, and through the logos, understanding God as this unity. But that apparently did not permeate to well, that was being pushed out. So this was Pat Robertson. This is why people did not like him, and he is no longer with us. So I wish his soul an easy passage. Probably already happened, but it's easy passage and healing and recovery and well-being, which I believe happens in the great beyond. Um, and I wish for the atrocities that he could have contributed to be dissolved in this life. So thank you for watching.